It's actually a very great honor to have an opportunity to speak with you. Stanley Ritchie, violinist, Baroque specialist, Baroque and classic period specialist, if I may say so. You are on the faculty for some years now at the University of Indiana, Indiana University, Bloomington. I knew you when I was much younger, in my 20s and 30s. I knew of you because, as I told you before we started, I attended all of the Philadelphia String Quartet concerts in Seattle. I'm the hapless guy that brought the Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival to Seattle in 1979 and 1980.
Really?
Yeah, promptly went broke, by the way. It was way over my head, but they managed to continue for many years. So I'm very proud of that. And also, you were concertmaster of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, and I used to drive up from Seattle in the 70s to catch Vancouver Symphony concerts. So you have been a fixture in my life since I was probably in my 20s. I want to thank you for that.
So faith.
Born and educated in Australia. You know, I really didn't know that. So I was delighted to see that, a good Aussie. Sydney Conservatorium of Music. And now listen, well, everybody out there who is a fiddle player who knows the art, listen to these teachers. Blew my brains away. Fournier in Paris, Joseph Fuchs, Oscar Shumsky, Samuel Kissel. I mean, all of the great violinists you have studied with of the 20th century. Just a who's who. As I mentioned, concertmaster of the New York City Opera, goes on and on and on. Associate concertmaster of Metropolitan Opera, assistant master of Vancouver Symphony. What an amazing career! And now you are passing all of that wealth, especially of your expertise in Baroque and classic repertoire, along to these brilliant young students at Indiana University School of Music in Bloomington. And we are talking about today, and one hardly knows where to begin, but we're just going to plunge in. We are talking about your recording, released in 2013, but recorded actually in 2007, which brings me to the idea that I hear over and over again, oh, I made that recording 4 years ago, it's no good, it can't possibly be of any interest at all. It's like, oh, I wrote Moby Dick in 1848 and it can't possibly be of any value anymore. And it's the same ridiculous argument. So I am thrilled to let everybody know that we are talking about a recording that you made in 2007 that is absolute perfection of the complete sonatas, solo sonatas and partitas of Bach. Everybody that's a fiddle player knows and has been there, and we're going to talk about that, the good, the bad, and the ugly of those encounters, and what you are doing to try and correct certain possible misunderstandings about interpretation of the period in that music, and just how to approach it in general. We should just begin with a kind of an overview, if you don't mind, of Baroque performance practice. And I think I found a quote here. This business of let's open it up with this business of, I remember even in the early 70s having frankly been weighted down by the interpretations of Baroque performance by the 40s and 50s, those heavily romantic interpretations of the Baroque repertoire, so totally incorrect. And then along came John Eliot Gardiner and blew my brains out with his interpretation, his life. He brought the music to life, and we, all of us in the profession, finally began to realize that what we had been hearing was not correct. So why don't we start there? Just give me a little overview about your own experience of that transition from the old days to the new interpretations.
Bad days. Yeah, I have to say that when I was a student, I hated Bach.
You said that in your program notes. I don't blame you.
Yeah, but I know now that I was right, because it was made so difficult and as you say, so heavy, that I thought, oh, this is awful. This is awful music. So now, 60, 70 years later, how old I don't remember now. Yeah, I love it. It's sort of really a passion. It's a focal point of my life. And, I not only made a recording, I've written a book on the interpretation. And I teach a course, and that's for modern players, to try and share my ideas with them. With mixed results. Some are very good, and some are sort of so bogged down in tradition that it's very difficult for them to get out of it.
And let's make sure that you understand the wrong tradition. A
Well,
tradition from
yeah, when I say tradition, I'm talking about what you're saying in the
yeah,
40s and 50s, or
yeah.
you know, who knows when it all went wrong? I mean, did they? We tend to blame the Romantic era for a lot of things that I think probably are not their fault at all.
Hmm.
Somewhere along the line, somebody started to get very heavy in Bach. I remember that when I studied the pieces in 1953 or 4, something like that. I started with the Carl Flesch edition of it, and I just sort of roll my eyes now when I think about what was in there, and this is why I did not like the music at all, because it was so heavy-handed,
Hmm.
and so wherever he came from, who knows?
Well, probably a Germanic romantic, Germanic romantic
Yeah.
tradition. Yeah.
Well, see, largely, I think what happens is that people play Bach in the way they do, who are not in the early music area, because they don't have they haven't done their homework.
Hmm.
They don't have knowledge of what everybody has access to now because of the research that musicologists have done. We know so much about how they approached music, how they thought about music, the technique, and everything that when I was a student, it didn't exist. We knew nothing about that at all. So it was no wonder that there was this traditional way of playing. I regret to report that it still happens, and there's no excuse anymore, really. If you're interested in Bach,
Hmm.
sometimes, especially in the academic business, School of Music or competitions, there's a sort of Bach requirement. I scratch my head. I do not know why students are obliged to play Bach in the way they do. Anyway, most of them. Some are very, very sensitive and malleable. And can be encouraged to play with much more poetry, much more sensitivity, and not aggressively sort
Yes.
of
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
do something.
Yeah.
The first things I told my students in that course is that when you play Bach, whatever you do, don't try to be a great violinist or a great violist or a great cellist. The worst thing you can do, you have to
Yeah.
be humble.
Yeah.
You have to let the music come out through you. You are a vehicle. You're transmitting something from Bach, but not imposing yourself on it.
Yeah. And by the way, that is one of the biggest problems. What you've just described, it has become kind of a bravura requirement to play Bach, and a bravura way to, as you mentioned in your program notes, to over ornament, to show off. This is not Italian opera in the 17th century. This is entirely different, and simplicity is the answer, I believe, and I think I hope you agree with me. Moreover, as you mentioned in your program notes. All of the polyphony, all of the wonder is there. You don't have to go digging for it. You don't have to crash into it. It's just there. Let the instrument speak the notes, if you will, as you do so beautifully in this absolutely gorgeous set. And you can imagine how many times I've heard and reviewed.
Thank you.
And by the way, I remember when we first started discussing my having a look at this particular recording, you mentioned that you had made it, and you just it had kind of fallen by the wayside. People had not paid very much attention to it, and or if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm mistaken. And so it has been just a revelation for me to hear it in your clean, clear, beautiful, thoughtful, and you know what I mean, stretching, allowing every note to speak, and it's very, very important, as opposed to, as we discussed, to bashing through and being dramatic and bravura and all, and then the false pursuit of a fresh so-called interpretation. Do you want to touch on that for a little bit? How young musicians, I sound like an old guy myself, are stuck in that mode.
Yeah, well, as I say, they're required, as I guess we were too, when I was a kid, to learn Bach. But what's really interesting, by the by, is that we know that that these pieces were pedagogical material even during his lifetime.
Hmm.
I think it was C.P.E. Bach said that he'd heard from some, virtuoso or a prominent violinist that he knew nothing better than these pieces to form a young violinist. And that's something that's very interesting because the idea of Bach pieces being pedagogical material sort of sticks in the gullet a little bit. You think of, Kreutzer Road, etc., etc. But indeed, these pieces are unique in the kind of technical control and virtuosity of a certain kind that they demand. That is not demanded in the violinist in any other repertoire, really. I mean, the polyphonic technique that's involved takes, a lot of thought and a lot of, skill of a kind, which is different from, bashing through romantic concertos.
Yeah.
So anyway, as I always say to my students, is, don't try to impose yourself on Bach. Don't try to be a great violinist when you play Bach. But if you're humble and you listen to the music and let it come out through you, and not try to demonstrate what a great fiddle player you are, then magic happens.
By the way, you have said, I can't resist using this quote. You have a couple of juicy quotes in your program notes. I'm going to try to. You say, quote, "Not pieces for young people. They are adult literature." Now that can be. As a kid, I would have said, "Oh, you're crazy! I'm going to explore this stuff. How dare you tell me not to go there until I'm 50?" But go ahead and give us a little idea of what you really mean. I have a good idea, but go ahead, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, simply, I mean, partly it reflects my own experience. As you said, it was 2007 when I recorded these pieces, and I've been playing for an awful long time. And I was 72 at the time. And I felt then that I wanted simply the reason for recording them was simply to have a record, as it were, of how I felt about the pieces at that time.
Legacy.
Yeah, well, that's right. And I'm going to say firstly that of course, needless to say, there are a lot of things I wish I could do again.
That's what keeps us alive. We talked about this. Music is always changing. We're always finding a revelation in music. That's the joy of our art, of any art form. The joy of discovery upon discovery upon discovery. Excuse me. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, just another digression. I read in a Time magazine interview or something with Yo-Yo Ma recently. He likened Bach to a river, which is always changing. And what a beautiful analogy that is.
Let me just, we lost you just a little bit, so you are saying Yo-Yo Ma has described music as a flowing river, constantly changing.
It's a river, that's right, which is constantly changing. But back to the other topic, though, you see, these days, kids here at the school in Bloomington, they can play things I wouldn't have dreamed of playing when I was a kid. I never tried to play some of the things they play brilliantly, with no problem. Nothing's any problem technically. And I think the danger then is, and as you often see, that one of the things you've got to do to establish yourself in this profession is to record the Bach solos. So they jump in when they're young, and they are not really ready. They play them. Fingers are all there, but in a sense, all too often they're mimicking. In other words, they know how the piece goes because they've heard it, and that's it. But they have time, and I mean, obviously, this doesn't happen overnight. You have to live with this music. You have to absorb it. You have to look at it very carefully. In my course that I teach here in Bloomington, I give assignments. Of analytical assignments, in other words, extracting a bass line and so on and so forth, just to try and draw attention to the polyphonic nature of this music. 17th century German, late 17th century German aesthetic was you know, the goal was how to make one violin sound like several, and there were some wonderful examples of that. The Biber Passacaglia, which is one of the most beautiful pieces. That's not in most modern violinist repertoire, but it's 40 years before Bach, and an amazing example of where the evolution of style and technique was at that time in Germany. 40 years later, out come Bach's unaccompanied pieces, but the way had been paved. And so that what's essential, of course, in approaching this music is understanding that it's polyphonic music. And there's an awful lot of chordal writing in Bach, but they're not chords that are necessarily accents in the music. They're where all the voices come together for a moment. What perceives this, and it does one's homework and analyzes the music for vocal lines, for harmony, harmonic structure, and the melodies, the basic melodies, and so on. One can see so much in the music, so much that's so intriguing, and ambiguous. There's so many different things in so many places where you can have more than one idea about how it goes. This is all right in a movement that has repeats because you can do it two ways.
Well, anyway. I think one more beautiful quote that I think is appropriate for this part of the conversation, and also is, if I may quote you again, you say, despite research and performance practice of the Baroque period, there persists an astonishing degree of ignorance. And I think I think it's getting better. Frankly, I'm hearing much more of that pre-Bach repertoire. There's a wonderful trio string trio I'm about to review. Their speciality is classic performance practice, Haydn properly, and so on. And I read about all of these composers, Bieber, all of those pre-Bach composers had, they were just words on a page at the time. Now I can actually hear and experience this music. So it is getting better in that way. There's such a wide and vast new repertoire for young musicians to have a look at. The catch is, I suppose, convincing them to have a look. At all.
Feeding them to water and all that sort of stuff.
Listen, what else was I going to ask you? You suggested, and it never occurred to me before, that the addition of modern interpretive notation, whenever that started, for good and evil, that as you say, it kind of locks people, it locks especially young players into a preconceived notion. Yeah. It reminds me, in my own little modest experience, of a particular piece, a Holst piece. It was for wind ensemble, E-flat, whatever it's called, suite for band. First movement, clearly a dirge. But Frederick Fennell and the Eastman Wind Ensemble in the 1950s made a recording, totally incorrect interpretation of that first movement, and every band director since has been playing that first movement totally incorrect. So how do you work through this dilemma where stuff is now loaded onto music? You almost have to tell students to get rid of it all and start over and open their mind and think for themselves.
Oh, I do all the time. Yeah, I the two bits of advice: either don't listen to recordings, or if you do, listen to a lot.
Yeah,
and then,
good idea.
Pick up what you want from them. But essentially, what I try to do is to teach people how to read music. Essentially, what it is.
But that's a profound statement you've just said. Can you explicate just a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about Bach specifically, of course, but I mean it carries over. Well, let's start with the fact that until the end of the 18th century, composers did not put expression marks in music. They didn't have to, because the musicians were trained in a certain way to recognize, B, all of the information that they need, which is in the music. And that's what I try to teach, in my Bach course. So how do you understand dynamics and tempo, etc., from just the notes themselves? And it becomes, hopefully, it becomes very obvious, very apparent, after a while. Oh my gosh, yes, yeah, this can't be any slower than this, or obviously there's a crescendo here and a diminuendo there, because how else can you do it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
And understanding dance styles. You mentioned that of the period. It's just basic, really. It's just really kind of basic research. A person studying a jig has to know what a jig was, how it was thought of in 1713.
Well, but even now, the possibility exists, if you happen to be in the right place at the right time, to take a dance class and feel what a minuet or a bourrée or sarabande,
Yeah, exactly.
And that's very important because, for example, if somebody's playing a sarabande for me and they play it too slowly, or at least at a tempo that a dancer would never think of taking it as, I can sort of demonstrate it in a very crude way, the reason, which has to do with the two steps that are simple ballroom steps, first and second beats of the measure, and then you stand on one foot with your heels almost touching, praying for the next downbeat to come.
What an amazing class! I'd give anything to see that demonstrated at some point. You demonstrating the art of Baroque dance as well as music.
It would be hilarious because I'm not a dancer.
And let's talk now a little bit about embellishment. And the reason I want to go there is I've been reviewing CDs for whatever. I made the choice to I stepped into this role with performingartsreview.net. By the way, that's where your interview and my thoughts on your set and videos and links to buy the CD, all that stuff is going to go up at performingartsreview.net. But what I've encountered over and over again are young, and what I mean by that is artists in their 30s now, who are now freely improvising. Classical musicians, pianists, for example, who have been freely so there's the good side of the bad culture, in my view anyway, the popular culture that has come along, and this is Gunther Schuller who predicted this third stream where classical music and jazz as an improvisation would meld together. So this art of embellishment, I think, actually is coming back. We lost it somewhere along the line, didn't we?
Well, sure. I mean, I remember once being told when I was a kid, don't play by ear. I mean, what? Let's stifle a child like that? That's awful.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, needless to say, well, I'll tell you a funny story. After I, as I put it, escaped from the Metropolitan Opera, I was playing with a group, the New York Chamber soloists, right? Modern players, of course. And we had a gig, a residency, a few-day residency in an upstate New York SUNY or something, somewhere. And so one of the things we were asked to do was to improvise for a dance or to play for a dance improvisation course. And so we went along. We sat in the corner. We played one of our pieces, and that was fine. The dancers improvised to it. And then somebody out there says, "Hey, why don't the musicians improvise?" Terror. Terror. So we made silly noises on our instruments, and of course it didn't work. And then when we were huddled in the corner and terrified, and then maybe the same person, somebody said, "Hey, why don't the musicians turn out and face the dancers?" So we did. We turned out and faced the dancers, and we started again, and we were reacting to what we saw. And lo and behold, a work of art ensued, and there was an ovation at the end for everything. So, at that time, this was 1970, we were musicians, classical musicians were never asked to improvise. But when the Baroque thing came along, I, gradually got into it myself. Now, I'm not a great improviser by any means. I can, put a few notes here and there, but there are some people now, as you say, who make a living doing it. It's so we've come a long way in that respect. Sort of throwing off the shackles of the tradition from the first half of the 20th century, shall we say.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And by the way, I'm a victim of that as well. A pure classicist, stuffy, terrified of improvisation, except in the shower. I could do it. I could hum improvisation, but I couldn't sit down. At the time, I was playing clarinet for Richard Stoltzman at Cal Arts. That's when I said, okay, I'm going to be a conductor. I'm not going to make my own reeds. That's crazy. but just that art of there I am, a clarinetist of some, modest, good classical music skill. I couldn't improvise on that instrument to save my soul. I probably couldn't do it even today. But the point is, it's all loosening up, and that's all good.
Yeah.
Where the musicians, brilliant musicians, are rediscovering without even batting an eye. It's not like they're struggling even. It's just a natural thing again to improvise. And so we've talked about this business of students being kind of corralled into what someone else has told them to do, and the fear of freely improvising a bit more. But also, as you mentioned, it has to somehow. And the art is to achieve a sort of naturalness of this. It can't be affected in any way, or it gives up the game instantly. Somehow it has to be quite natural.
Yeah. One thing I should inject here. I've been at IU now for 36, 37 years, and when I first came, of course, I was something of a freak.
Because you were coming from Seattle?
No, regarded by the faculty as something weird, what is this Baroque violin thing,
Oh, really?
And now there's not one person on the string faculty who would forbid his student to come and study with me Baroque violin, play in my orchestra. And indeed, some of them sort of recommend my book and my recording to their students.
Well, you've arrived.
Huh?
You've arrived. How long did that take? I mean, resistance amongst academics can be like brick walls.
Well, it's gradual, gradual, one after another sort of thing. But no, I've got some very strong supporters in the string faculty. I'm very happy about that.
And I think young musicians need to know the differences in performance practice if they're going to get any, even on modern instruments, if they're going to get any. I'm reminded this wonderful string trio that I'm really delighted of. Can't remember the name just now. I'll get to their CD in a bit, but also use gut strings and performance practice from the Baroque and Classic. And the one woman expressed about intonation that she called it her blood finger. If the blood is on the right side of the finger in the string, intonation is okay. If the blood is on the wrong side, something like that. Just an amusing thing. But it's tricky, isn't it? It's tricky with gut strings and achieving such beautiful intonation and so on. Let's see. We talked about the by the way, maybe we talked about this off camera, but as I mentioned to you, this recording. Let me go up and give a plug to Musica Omnia, which is, I guess, a non-profit that at least put this one out.
Yeah.
Something like that. The Italian church. I don't think we discussed this on air, but the Italian church, as you describe it, in some obscure corner of Italy. I asked you if you had been there in a previous life, because the acoustic in that room is just absolute perfection. It's just gorgeous. It's not too much. It's not too little. It's perfect.
Yeah, very special.
And also, you mentioned that you had started this as you maybe do 2 or 3, something like that, if I understand correctly. And 4 days went by, and you had done all of them, gone through all of them, except for the last partita or something like that. Was it the last partita or last sonata?
The C major sonata.
The C major sonata. So you decided, what the hell? We'll just finish the whole thing off. It just speaks to not only the expertise of your mastery of this repertoire, but I'm so glad you did. May I just thank you for giving us the complete set of unaccompanied sonatas and partitas. It's a beautiful, beautiful set. What
Yeah.
else do we? What else do we? What are you dying to talk about here? I'm just while I scroll through and see what I forgot to mention also. We've talked about a little bit about the aesthetic concept of polyphony, about discovering the polyphony within those notes. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's what I enjoyed about your recording. You clearly took time to allow those notes and their polyphony to speak. How close am I to getting that one correct?
Mm. Well, yes, I'm I'm always pointing out to the students that you really have to organize the music in a logical way, just like speech. You know, there has to be punctuation in order for the music to speak clearly. I have a little thing that I always say that I refer to as the German railway clock. And I asked them, have you ever traveled by train in Germany? And most of them haven't. And I said, well, when you do, you look at the clock on the platform and you'll see something very interesting happen. And that's the second hand that goes 56, 57, 58, 59, 60. 1, 2, 3. There's that gap at the top and the minute hand clicks across in that. So the seconds are a little less than seconds. But the idea, you know, that instead of two things happening at the same time, 60 and 1. So I use this analogy for the ways in which you can clarify the music, make it more intelligible to the listener.
And as you said, I see here what I love about this particular recording is your leisurely approach to phrasing. As we've said, possibly ad nauseum, but allowing everything to speak. And we mentioned earlier, young musicians have been somehow instructed that they are to make bravura demonstrations of their amazing technique, and they scream through the whole thing. It's just a big fat noise, really. Of course, there's lovely levels of playing, but the point is, it takes time, doesn't it? It probably takes age, because you've mentioned it's a business where it does, to be able to really relax a little. I'm thinking of Goretsky. He went on and on and on to students about his third symphony. You know, it's like, slow down, listen, listen, listen.
Yep. No, this is what I'm telling my Bach class, you know, twice a week. That's exactly what you must do in order to first of all, to clarify the music, but also to have better effects of surprise. You know, silence is so important. Delaying something in order to emphasize it and things like that, instead of just going, you know, barreling on.
Yeah, and space.
Space. You know, like as I said in my program notes, or a line of notes, we are taught. As students, we are taught interpretations, but not how to interpret, not the art of interpretation. That's what I'm trying to do to these kids, you know.
And it does come with time. One can't really assimilate interpretation overnight at age 26. You know what I'm trying to say?
I mean, I've been through the whole thing. You know, I had a normal, well, not quite normal, because I really didn't have a good violin teacher or any violin teacher to speak of until I was 17. But I know where these kids are coming from, and I know what they're asked to do and why they're asked to do it. What I'm hoping, as I said to somebody today, you know, our job as teachers is not to give you answers, but to teach you what to ask, what the questions. To leave with more questions than answers.
Brilliant.
And so I don't know. I always say to my students, point out how fortunate they are to live and be studying now, when there's so much more information than we ever had when I was a student.
Yes,
absolutely. About interpretation, about style, and so on.
Absolutely. The devil internet also has its good side. The font of information is just amazing. I remember, you know, just even part of my wearing my hat as a critic, you know, I'd have to run to damn dictionary and look up words. Now I just dial them up and I get,
Yep.
reams of information and sub meanings and all the rest of it. Okay, now you're very comfortable. Are you planning on retiring anytime soon? I hate to ask the question, but the point is, what's next? Is there another little project, or are you just kind of enjoying life in your senior diplomatic position?
Retirement is not a word in my vocabulary, I'm
Good.
afraid.
Excellent.
I enjoy what I'm doing, and I'm still in reasonably good health.
Yeah.
So, but the only thing is, I don't play anymore. I have
Oh,
had
interesting.
arthritis operations and things, and so
Yeah.
I've put the violin down as far as public performance is concerned. I try to keep in enough shape to be able to demonstrate things to my kids, but even
Sure.
that is difficult for me.
Yes. And you mentioned the Baroque Orchestra at
That's right.
Indiana. Do you do a little conducting, or do you kind of how does that work if you're not playing much anymore?
Both. When it's feasible and appropriate, I let them do it a cappella. I think it's good experience for them to not have somebody waving the hand.
Yeah.
For example, we gave a program back at the end of October, which was the double-barreled, rather downer program, the Il pianto d'Arianna Locatelli, Arianna's Lament, Ariadne's Lament,
Yeah.
um, and um, and the Stabat Mater of Pergolesi. So I let them do the Locatelli. I rehearsed it, of course, and everything, but ultimately, I wanted them to do it to get the experience of playing without me waving my hands. But of course, the Stabat Mater is a little more
More
complicated.
complicated. Yeah,
So
exactly
I
right.
conducted that. So I do a little bit. I have no formal training as a conductor.
Oh,
Never.
neither does anybody. You know that.
No.
Now, remember, I said earlier when I was confronted with the idea as a clarinetist, I never did like the instrument very much anyway. But when Richard Stoltzman said, "And now we will make reeds," that's when I thought, "Oh well, and now I will become a conductor. Thank you very much," and ran into the arms of Lawrence Leighton Smith, who was my conducting teacher at Cal Arts. So anyway, well, so I have a funny feeling you're happy.
I am. Yeah, I'm. Listen, if you're going to teach for a living, what better place to be than something like Bloomington, where
Yes.
you have all these wonderful, wonderful students, as I say, who could play rings around me,
Yeah.
and well, even when I was in, really up court. And it's so exciting to work with these kids, and so many of them are like sponges. They're interested. They really are interested in what the
And
possibilities.
they're also clean slates because when I was in high school, I knew the repertoire, but I know it very well.
Mhm.
I mean, as a conducting student, I knew the repertoire. I've been listening to the symphonies. It's good, it's bad. Who knows for sure? But these kids come in and really have no idea of the repertoire even
Yeah, yeah,
at,
no,
at
that's
19.
true.
So they're quite open. That's the good side to it. But when you ask them how many symphonies Dvorak wrote, it can be a little depressing. That's a trick question anyway, I suppose. Stanley Ritchie, what a pleasure. I'm so glad we got together finally for this. As I have said, I'm actually going to try and get this video interview up and out to a huge mass of people at Facebook and LinkedIn, maybe this evening. I'll put it up on the performingartsreview.net site with other goodies on your designated page, the way I describe it, and then I'll throw together some notes and throw my analysis, if I dare, even
Yeah.
analysis of this wonderful set of the complete partitas unaccompanied and complete sonatas of Bach unaccompanied, and just the general overview is glorious, perfection, stunning. So rewarding.
Well,
So bravo, bravo, bravo.
pleased you think so. That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thanks. I think we're done.
Okay. Well,
Thanks
thank
very
you
much
very much.
indeed.
I've
Right on.
enjoyed it very much.
Bye bye.